Hello lovely people, welcome back to my channel. I'm Adebimpe from Style by Binta, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make this simple Bubu kaftan dress. It's going to be having a v-neck and it's also going to be having pockets at both sides. So the first thing I'd like you to do if you're coming across my video for the first time is to please support my channel by subscribing to it, like this video, turn on your notification button so as for you to get notified anytime I upload new video, as I upload weekly. So the first thing I'm going to be doing, since the actual length of this Ankara fabric is 45, all Ankara fabric comes with a length of 45. I've never seen anyone beyond that length. If you have, you can leave it in a comment for me. I would really like to know. So the next thing I just did was to measure the full length of my client, which is 56 plus 1 inches, which makes 57. So I measured it out on the width of the Ankara fabric. So I'm going to be folding it into two, then I'm going to be cutting it out. That is to say, I have 57 inches in two places, then I folded it into four again. This is what I have. So I have four folds all together. So I measure the length again to confirm, then I rule it out. In this case, since the Ankara fabric is 45 inches and not up to the length of my client, I convert the width of the Ankara fabric to the length of my client. Why the length of the Ankara fabric becomes the width of my client. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to input my shoulder to shoulder measurement, divided by 2, which gave me 8. That is to say, I have 16 as the shoulder to shoulder measurement of my client. So whatever I have from that shoulder to shoulder measurement down remain my sleeve. So this also include a folding allowance of 2 inches. So the next thing I did was to determine my neckline. So in this case, I'm using 3.5 inches by 2 inches. So I'm going to be connecting it together in a circular form. So I have a circle neckline. This neckline is just for the back. So the next thing I did was to come to the sleeve part and I came down by 12 inches. This is going to be the sleeve opening. So the next thing I did was to remeasure that 12 inches just for me to have a straight line to work with, a straight line to connect the points together. So the next thing I went ahead to do was to input all the other lengths. So I input the bust point, which is 14 inches, the waist point, which is 19.5 inches, then the hip length, which is 26 inches. Okay, this measurement is not constant. This is just the measurement for my client. In other case, we have different measurements. So you have to just take the measurement of yourself or the person you are working for. So the next thing I did was to rule up a straight line on it. Then I went ahead and labeled it. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to input the bust circumference or divided by 4 on the bust point. So bust circumference is 50, divided by 4 is 12.5. So I input it and I added 3 inches extra allowance to it. This also includes the same allowance in this case. So I'm going to be connecting the point to that sleeve side, just as you see me do. So whatever I have as my bust point, bust circumference divided by 4 plus 3 inches is what I'm going to be placing on the waistline as well as on the hip line. Since this dress is a boo dress, so there is no need for shaping it out at all. In this case, it will only alter the star. So I'm adding, you can as well add up to 5 inches allowance to it. It's your choice, but in this case my client does not want it too big. I went ahead and I connected the points together. So I came to the hem line and I also measured the hip circumference divided by 4 plus 3 inches plus 3 inches extra allowance. So I connected it to the hip line. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to cut it out. So the next thing I did was to open the sleeve part, after which I remove one piece for the front. So I'm going to be working on this piece to cut my front neckline. In this case, I have a V front neckline, so it's going to be different from the back, so I had to cut it separately piece. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to cut the V neck. I assumed a straight line, which means I returned the 2 inches I had already cut out for the neckline back to the piece. Then I measure from that place down. I measured 8 inches. In this case, this 8 inches is not going to reveal anything. It is just because it's going to be a v-neck, and v-necks by nature are always very tight to the neck if you don't come down this much. So it's going to eventually be choking if you use like 5 inches, because they enclose, they are not like round necks or any other neckline. They enclose your chest. The next thing I did was to connect the shoulder point to this my marked out 8 inches. So I cut it out. So the next thing I did was to mark 3.5 inches from the shoulder line out. So I'm going to be marking this 3.5 inches all across to the M line. So I went ahead and I marked the 3.5 inches down to the M line, just as you see me. So I connected my point together. So in a case whereby you want to place a different fabric on it and you don't want to top stitch on it, you want to join it together from the edges, you can cut this 3.5 inches out. But before you cut it out, ensure you had half-inch seam allowance, which you are going to use to join the new fabric to it. But in this case, I'm going to be cutting out a fresh pattern. I'm going to be top stitching on it, rather I'm going to be using it to turn the neck. So I went and shaped the neckline on a new pattern. Then I measured 3.5 inches plus half-inch, which is going to be my folding allowance. So I went ahead and I measured that 4 inches all around, 3.5 inches, which is my initial cutout marked out on the clothes. So I'm going to also be adding half-inch. So I went ahead and I connected the lines together on my fresh pattern. So the next thing I did was to blend this sharp edge. I also did the same on the fabric. You don't want sharp angles at that part, so it should flow naturally. So I went ahead and I blend that part, then I cut it out. So this is what I have, and this is what I have on my fabric. So the next thing I did was to fold the edge by half of an inch, and I'm going to be using a hemi gum to hold it down. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to work on the back neckline also. So I'm going to be cutting the facing for the back neck. So this is done by just placing the back piece on a folded piece of fabric. Also, I'm also using the salvage edge of the Ankara, which has different design also for the back neck facing. So I went ahead and I traced the neckline. So the next thing I did was to mark the width of my facing, and I made it also 4 inches. The down part was not up to 4 inches again, but I don't mind. That shoulder part is okay. It is necessary it's 4 inches just to ensure that it rhyme with my full front piece also. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to fold this edge, and I'm going to be using a hemi gum. So the next thing I did was to place the front piece on my table. Then I placed the piece I'm going to be using to design the front on the wrong side of the fabric. So it means the right side of the piece that I'm designing the front with on the wrong side of the fabric. So I'm going to be stitching from one edge of the shoulders down to the center part, and I'm going to be leaving the needle of my machine on this very center. Then I'm going to be turning the fabric in such a way that it faces the other shoulder part, and I'm going to be stitching down. This is how to get a perfect V shape while stitching. So the next thing I did was to notch the neckline. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to flip it, the piece I'm designing with, to the front side. In this way, I'm going to be having a neat neckline. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to now top stitch on the main fabric. So I'm going to be flipping the design to one side, and I'm going to be top stitching on the main fabric, just as you see the illustration. So I'm top stitching on the right side of the actual fabric. So this is what I have after top stitching on it. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to also top stitch on the edges of this design, or you can use your hemming gum to hold it down then top stitch. But in this case, I'm going to just be pinning it down just to make sure that this design is aligning to the direction I want it to be. So that's the essence of pinning it down or holding it down with hemming gum. So I went ahead and I pinned it down, and I went to the sewing machine to top stitch on the edges very close to the edge. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to work on the back piece. So I'm going to be placing the right side of the neck facing on the wrong side of the main fabric of the back piece, and I'm going to be stitching it together. So I went ahead and I notched it around after stitching it together. So I'm going to be top stitching on it on the right side of the main fabric, after which I'm going to be flipping it to the right side, just as you see me do. So I went ahead and I top stitch on it also to hold this back neck facing down to the main fabric. So after top stitching on it, the next thing I did was to bring the front piece on top of the back piece. So I went ahead and I stitched the shoulder together on both sides. So this is what I have. So the next thing I did was to fold my sleeve by 2.5 inches. So I went ahead and I fold the sleeve by 2.5 inches. So the next thing I did was to align the sides together. Then I stitch it on both sides. So I have a perfect kaftan dress. So the next thing I did was to come down by 23 inches. This is going to serve as the placement for my pocket, for the side pocket. So I marked from the shoulder 23 inches on both sides. So I really line on that 23 inches. So the next thing I'm going to be doing, so the next thing I did was to measure my pocket. I measured 10 inches by 10.5 inches. And this is a salvage edge of the Ankara fabric that I'm going to be using to design the upper part of the pocket. So this is what I did. I cut out the salvage edge and I'm going to be joining it together to the pocket piece. So eventually I'm going to be the length of about 12 inches by the width of 10.5 inches for my pocket. So the next thing I did was to use a hemi gum to hold the edges of the pocket piece by half of an inch all round. So the next thing I did was to go and iron the center of the pocket. So it is this line that I'm going to be aligning to my side seam of the main fabric, just as you see me do. So this is the side seam plus the center of my pocket piece that I'm aligning together. So I'm going to be using a pin to pin it down. So I'm going to be aligning it in a perfect way. So the best way to get it aligned is to shift your dress in a way that the side seam is laying flat, just as you see me do. So I'm going to be aligning it. You have to make sure that your pin that you are using to pin it down is not picking the piece of fabric beneath, is only picking the side of the part you want to sew on. So this is what I did all round. I held it down in strategic places so as to make stitching on it very easy. So I did this for the other side as well. So this is the raw edge. I've already folded it by about 1 inch. So here comes to the end of my video, and this is the outcome. If you are yet to subscribe to my video, please do so. Give this video a thumbs up, like and share my video. Thanks. See you in my next video.